back, everybody, to Psychedelics Today. We've got Joe Moore here with Kyle Buller. Hi, Kyle.
Hey, Joe.
So today we're going to do one of those Solidarity Friday episodes to help everybody out through this COVID pandemic, hopefully. And hopefully we bring a little bit of sanity and interesting thought into your world. So people seem to like these Friday episodes, so I think we're going to keep doing them. So yeah, I guess before we get rolling, just a quick word about how you can help us out. We've got a great deal over at Audible or audibletrial.com/psychedelics today. You get a free audiobook and a free month trial over there. The recent Mike J book on mescaline is fantastic. Eric Davis's High Weirdness is really fun. Stan Groff's Holotropic Breathwork just came out on Audible on the 28th. So
nice.
Scoop that up. You've got Sacred Knowledge and a lot more up there. Some really great psychedelic classics, including James Fadiman's Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. People need to read those if you're really serious about getting involved. And I think you're going to like them and learn quite a bit, regardless of where you're at in your career. So that's it on Audible. Again, audibletrial.com/psychedelics today. You get a free month and a free book. So check that out. Patreon.com/psychedelics today. If you want to leave us a small donation of $2 a month or more, you've got some special perks up there, so check that out. And we do release content early there. So if you're a fiend, perhaps that's a good place for you to go. What else do we got, Kyle?
Mud?
Well, we talk about them on Tuesdays, but it's delicious.
Oh, okay.
Mudwater.com.
Cool.
Yeah, delicious stuff. Anything else?
No, I think that's it on our end.
Cool.
But I definitely want to remind folks about the Shadow course. It's still available. It will be available for however long we have it up there. And it's donation-based. So definitely check that out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. We just wrapped up. It was awesome. We did a webinar with everybody on there that was part of it. Deanna Rogers, Laura Northrup, Jessica DeRuzza, Dr. Joe Taford, Dr. Gita Vade, Dr. Scott Hill, and Dr. Ido Cohen, and you and myself. So yeah, definitely check that out, donation-based, and you'll get the webinar with that as well. So it was fun.
Yeah, super cool. Also, we're now about to kick off sales for our next round of clinicians training. So navigating psychedelics for therapists and clinicians. You can check that out at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. The dates are from July to August, so it's about 8 weeks. And we've been getting rave reviews there. And people just seem to really love it. I love teaching it. It's just been a lot of fun. So anything you really want to say about the course, Kyle?
Just that it kicks off July 9th.
July 9. Yeah, first date there. Thursdays, we'll do a 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern and a 7 p.m. U.S. Eastern time slot. Folks in Australia and Europe should be able to find something that works for you. So check it out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com, and it's called the Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. So right on the main page there, and you can learn more. So yeah, let's dig into some of these news topics. So we've been talking a lot about business and corporations raising money. Saw this article here, psychedelic company Orthogonal Thinker closes a $6 million seed round. So they're this company out of Hawaii. Kevin Matthews from Spore and the Denver Decriminalization Initiative is on their board of advisors. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this article says the company was valued at $111 million, and which is a huge number. And they've got a kind of a portfolio of brands, it seems like. One called Silly, another one called Ei.Ventures. And it's this quote here is interesting. From the CEO named Jason Hobson, the current health pandemic has resulted in a societal shift in the way we think about our health and the important access to treatment, both physical health and mental health. Ei.Ventures believes this is the right time to lean into mental health issues such as mood disorders and addiction, and eventual access to therapeutic treatments from innovations in botanical compounds that have been around for thousands of years. In terms of right now is the right time, realistically, it was 30 years ago or 20 years ago or earlier when these things were still quite legal. I really just wonder what that culture change was that happened. Like pharmaceutical companies were making fine money and hospitals were doing really great work in the 50s and 60s. And why didn't doctors have the guts to stand up to Nixon on these things? Or what kind of horseshit was going down to make doctors so scared that they couldn't Like this is around the time of McCarthyism, and everybody could be, you're a communist, so you're going to jail kind of thing, or you're deplatformed by the federal government because you have communist sympathy. It's like really easy to just trump up shit like that back then.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe that's it. I don't know. So worth considering.
Be interesting to chat with like Dr. Bill Richards or some of those folks back in the day and see like what type of fear was going on back then, or why couldn't they possibly petition? I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting thought, Joe.
Yeah. And the fact that like DC based hospitals were the last ones issuing or like doing psychedelic therapy because DC based people wanted it still is really interesting. So like what is that? It's just really kind of gross, probably, in my opinion. But anything about this article on Orthogonal Thinker that was interesting to you?
No, not so much. Just, some business updates of people, just investing and where they're at. So,
right. There's so much money coming in, and it's not something this field is used to or comfortable with at all.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere else in the capitalist landscape is quite well in the grip of these investors, at the same time being harmed and also getting help from investors. So like now that the psychedelic world is seeing this stuff come in, it's really strange. Like the fact that a lot of groups might get patents and exclusivity on psilocybin and LSD, even though this stuff has been around for a very long time, like just seems really a little awkward, and perhaps crooked. I would hope the LSD patents don't hold up. And same thing with, various psilocybin patents. And, a hope though, I chatted with, I forget the name of the company, CEO of some biotech firm out of San Diego, who's got, I think 20 different types of yeast that can excrete various drugs. So they're using GE techniques to like take the, genetic code for the enzyme creation or whatever chemical creation from the plants and mushrooms and insert it into a yeast, and it can produce very cheap drugs for research and therapeutic purposes. So I think that's super interesting. And what does that look like 2 to 5 years downstream? We've got really cheap access to a lot of different compounds. What would Sasha Shulgin want to do there? He'd probably want to have like 7,000 of them, and be running some trials.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this next article here, Peter Thiel Backs Psychedelic-Drug Startup in latest funding round. So Peter Thiel's famous for a lot of things. Is made a killing at PayPal and has become kind of a target of a lot of psychedelic people's critiques. He invested heavily in Compass Pathways. I read his book From Zero to One. I thought it was interesting. He talks about how he only wants to make investments that are in companies that are exponentially better than the competition. Mm-hmm. And what that says is this massive investor thinks that psychedelics are exponentially better for treating certain indications than the conventional therapies. So, that on one hand feels good. On the other hand, also feels scary because what is he going to do? My main concern is, are these companies going to bully smaller organizations out of existence so that diversity doesn't really exist in the way we think it should?
Yeah.
So it's Atai Life Sciences is what Thiel just invested in. Within a year, they're looking at going public, which is interesting. They're looking at a mid-stage trial of ibogaine for opiate addictions, which is good. I'm glad more people are doing that. It's also trying to look at R-ketamine, so the opposite-handed side of the S-ketamine molecule that Johnson & Johnson put through, which will be good. So, it's nice that we have more companies bringing more offerings to the market and getting it pushed through the FDA. But it's also like, what are the implications, and do we really have a say? And I know we kind of touched a lot of this last week.
Yeah. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. And kind of like, I remember, I don't know if Symposia released this stuff pretty recently, but just chatting with them like in the past year or so, them talking about like even just the technology and data, like using AI and different technology to collect data, and what are they going to do with that data? I don't know, interesting, right? Here's something that feels really sacred at times, as we touched on, and then just like mining for data. It is a strange thing, but also the innovation that possibly comes out of that too, right? What could this look like in the future? Could they really be really creative and innovative and bring some new technology to the market that helps save people's lives? Totally possible, right? Or maybe it does the total opposite and really kind of destroys things at times too.
Right. So like on one hand, I'm really sympathetic for the medical model. But I don't think that everything should be reduced to that. Like we see huge potential in religious use, individual self-development, exploration, creativity, and more, and just fucking fun. So like there's so many angles here. And are we going to be eroding liberty further once these things need to be rescheduled? I know there was a big hubbub about a year or two ago about MAPS not necessarily being... Well, so MAPS is working to bring MDMA as a prescription drug to market. The hubbub was that it's not necessarily the case that when the drug becomes prescribable, it will be rescheduled, which I don't know of an exception to that rule in the past. A drug that was scheduled heavily was shown to be medically appropriate and prescribable and then not rescheduled. So I don't know if this is just total like weird conjecture just to get clickbait or not, but there's something there. I tend to think that all these things will be rescheduled. Like, I don't think the conspiracy is as hardcore as a lot of people do. Like, I think this is just, we're dealing with history as the enemy right now. And an inheritance of decades of high-level spending to promote, shitty propaganda about these things. So that to me is the real enemy here. But we'll see, like there's people fighting that. Like we're fighting that. Other groups are fighting it. There's even this new Netflix documentary that I haven't seen with tons of celebrities talking about their psychedelic use. So it's a weird situation we're in around all this stuff, but
Well, it's like really interesting to reflect on thinking back, I don't know, X amount of years ago, like when MAPS really started doing their stuff and psychedelic research really started to take off. There's this need or want to advocate the integration of psychedelics into culture and to have these medicines available. And now as it's progressing and, just the way business operates, it's starting to do that. It's starting to get out there in mainstream culture. You're starting to see different businesses move in to, stake their claim on it and to be innovative and try to bring new technology. And it's just like an interesting thing coming back to this sacredness, right? Like here's people that want to have all these values embedded into what they're doing, but we're also talking about we need to get this out to everybody. And then when it starts to leak out, we go, oh shit, like we didn't want it to be this way, right? And I think that's the challenge from like some observations, right? Just like looking at like groups like MAPS, they've been dedicated nonprofit, they've been really putting a lot of time and energy into their stuff, trying to like integrate some of those values. And I know, people have critiques on some of the things that have happened over the few years. But, when you look at MAPS versus some other companies, it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Like go MAPS. But I don't know. Just some thoughts about like, we're rooting for some sort of integration, accessibility. And then as it happens, it's almost like, oh no, how do we backtrack a little bit? Because now it's like, celebrities are talking about it. Now it's this new best thing. And kind of like some of that sacredness feels like it might be taken away. And now it's just another commodity to sell to somebody. And big money's coming in to finally say, yeah, now we can do this. So, yeah.
There was a comment in one of these articles here. I think it was this one on Medium. So it's Arnold, I think his name Mike Arnold from Silo, PSILO, says it's best for the consumer to have the least amount of regulation as possible. He says, what causes consumer products and therapy to be expensive? Artificially regulating their availability. So by, consolidating access to certain drugs as providers, like vertical integration that we might see from a group like Compass or Field Trip or whatever, like those are the artificial scarcity generators that will eventually get disrupted. But that, for a time, like it'll be, expensive and not as available as we might want it to be. MAPS has a plan for expanding the scope of availability through expanded access and beyond. But it's, it's not necessarily artificial. It's just like this boundary that the FDA process has kind of imposed. And the special type of permission, maybe approval a clinic needs to go through and start providing this stuff. So again, it's not necessarily that the FDA doesn't want this stuff out there. It's that we're still dealing with a lot of heartache from the 60s and 70s and the whole drug war. Mm-hmm. I think. Yeah. So the title of this article was medical researchers worry Silicon Valley could screw up psychedelics, and the blog is called 10. The author's Tessa Love. Yeah. The article had some good points. I think there was some things I had a problem with, like right here. Not everybody sees this opportunity for entrepreneurship as a good thing. For researchers looking into the efficacy of psychedelics for therapeutic purposes, these substances are far more than a market opportunity. They're potentially life-saving medications. After decades of prohibition, psychedelics are just barely gaining mainstream acceptance. One false step, a high-profile injury or death, for instance, could put psychedelics back where they started, banned, and considered to have no acceptable medical use. So this kind of circles back to that point we were making before, like why did researchers and doctors, when prohibition kicked off, not step up to the degree they are now? Like, science has changed a lot in the past couple decades, but I still think scientists would stand up. Like when the nuclear bomb thing was happening in the 40s, a lot of the top scientists were getting to the executive level to say this is like a horrifying idea, and I don't know that we should do this. Mm-hmm. And why didn't that happen with psychedelics, to say, hey, like banning this stuff is kind of horrifying. We're saving so many people from addiction and whatever else. Like, why are you going to make it not okay? So I don't really understand it, but I think at this point in history, people are now bold enough to step up to organizations and make a lot of noise and not back down.
Totally.
Like, perhaps we're just radicalized to that point now. Or
I think we have so much more information at our fingertips.
Yeah.
And it's like maybe easier to do that.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I wasn't alive back then, so I don't know what the political climate was like, and what type of tensions were actually in the air.
Right.
Maybe there was a really big fear of like I could maybe have everything taken away from me if I start stepping up and advocating. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. They made a really big example of Tim Leary and made him the most dangerous man in the world, or in America, and they spent a lot of money on that. It's no joke how much money was spent to make him look bad. Certainly there's some negative angles, but largely I'm a big fan. But yeah, the fact that we've inherited this is one of the main obstacles right now. And how do we cut through that? And, a lot of people just say it's through medical science. What if there's creative thinking like DMTX? Like, what if DMTX gets really well funded and then shows us some really interesting, repeatable things? You put somebody through this training program over the course of a year, and then they get a really intense session that lasts a couple hours or 10 hours or whatever. Like, what is DMT space in an IV scenario after that much time? Like, perhaps that's more interesting and compelling.
The Pentagon just released UFO footage.
Did you look at that? I didn't really check that out much. I watched some of the videos.
Yeah, that video was actually released a while ago, but I guess this is like the first time the Pentagon is officially releasing it. Before it was released by, I forget who it was released by. So the video has been around for a bit, but it's like the first time that they're saying, hey, here's this video. Yeah, DMTX, getting in touch with the weirdness. Yeah, what type of creative things could come out of that? Who knows? How could that, I don't know.
Right.
Whenever I think about that project, I just go, I don't even know what that would be like. Like, what type, like, how are you pushing the human psyche and consciousness at that point? Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating to think about. It's really interesting.
Right. Like, it's this idea of a transhumanist future that's really fucking interesting. Like, what happens when we augment the human with technology to the point where they become substantially more powerful than they are today? Like, is there an exponential increase in power or creativity, or what happens? I don't even know. Like, we need some people to go through the process to tell us.
Yeah.
So it reminds me of something I said on the show like maybe years ago. There's this Jack Black show on HBO called The Brink. And it's like Jack Black, some stoner living in the Middle East at an embassy, a U.S. embassy. And it's talking about this like crisis in the Middle East. And there's one of these jet fighter guys on a naval warship or aircraft carrier is like a Provigil dealer on the boat. So he's actually like selling Provigil to other people in the Army or the Navy. And he eventually accidentally, he thinks he took Provigil, but he took acid when he's going on a bomber run to drop some bombs somewhere. And then he gets on the phone with the president while he's on acid on a fighter jet. So I was like, this is fucking incredible. But like the idea is like what? So, the normal human, bipedal human with a stick or a gun or something has like X amount of power. Like what happens when somebody has that much LSD and has that kind of a weapon with nuclear capabilities? Like what the fuck is that? That's like something more powerful than what we thought Zeus could do. And pretty fucking scary. So like it's this angel of death type thing that was spawned by humanity's I don't know, humanity's weird development. So, yeah, interesting thoughts. I don't really know where to go with that, but just a thing that I hearken back to on a semi-regular basis, like psychedelically augmented war machines. It's like, yikes.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good segue into the DARPA thing. DARPA article.
Good call.
So DARPA wants the benefits of psychedelics without the hallucinations. So kind of coming back to this idea that a lot of these pharma companies that are kind of coming on the scene want to develop a new drug that doesn't have the hallucinations because that's a negative side effect. So yeah, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency is launching a new drug program for treating soldiers with PTSD, depression, anxiety, drug addiction, and it's drawing inspiration from psychedelic research. So it sounds like DARPA just announced the launch of what's called Focused Pharma Program for vets. So they seek to revolutionize mental health care by developing completely new psychotherapeutic drugs to quickly remedy prevalent neuropsychiatric conditions such as post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. So yeah, it's so interesting that some of these newer companies are looking at they're saying that the full-blown hallucination is not a desired outcome, right? Like, how can we create a drug which I guess comes back to, when we're thinking about like antidepressants and just the way so if we look at, say, the discovery of LSD and serotonin, right? There is this idea, I forget what the guy's name was, Dr. Woolley. And I think he was the person that discovered serotonin. But that idea that serotonin and LSD were similar in chemical structure, and that idea of, psychomimetic temporary schizophrenia, or a drug that mimics psychosis, and thinking, okay, you have this drug that is very similar to serotonin, then maybe serotonin is what's modulating mental health disorders. And really, that discovery of like LSD and serotonin really advanced psychopharmacology. I remember hearing Dr. David Nichols talk about without that discovery, like we don't know if we would have the psychopharmacology that we know about as today, because it really helped to, from some of the research that I've done, it really helped, I guess maybe solidify some of that chemical theory, right? Of like, oh, here's these receptors and here's drugs that can modulate that. So we have chemical imbalances. How can we create drugs that, modulate chemical receptors in the brain? And, then we started developing a lot of these different medications. And it just sounds like it's like we're taking what we know about psychedelics and saying, well, how can we create something without that effect and just keep creating new drugs on top of that away from the original substance, right? So, and I don't know, it's just interesting that, we're using some of the research based around psychedelics and saying, oh, wow, this is really treating PTSD or this is doing this. And then being like, well, how can we create new compounds, molecules, drugs that don't have any of that effect? And it makes me wonder, like, is it the experience or are we really just dealing with biochemistry at this point, right? And I think it's, a mix of both. As we said, it's very complex. Like there definitely is the chemical thing that's going on in the brain and receptors, but also what is the experience really? How is that really influencing a person's view on their own mental health? How are they dealing with their own mental health disorders? And sometimes those experiences can really shed light, right? Being able to recontextualize memories and reconsolidate memories and go back and just have a different understanding of maybe what happened in the past. Or, maybe you have this mystical experience and you realize, wow, and so I think there's it's complex, right? I think there's all these variables at play, but just interesting that a lot of these companies want to look at substances without that psychedelic effect. I don't know. Any thoughts on that, Joe?
Totally. So a lot of people aren't in a position where they can afford the uncertainty that comes post psychedelic experience, during and post. So like, to briefly be sympathetic to, the federal government, the military, like there's, number one, classified stuff that can come up in your sessions that could be then exposed to people who shouldn't know about it. The good or bad, that's just a functional consideration that people would need to make. So that's one reason why LSD psychotherapy or whatever might not be a good move. That said, psychedelics have never been shown to be a good truth serum type deal. It's certainly something that was researched. It just never really panned out that well, I don't think. So hard saying. I know that I've kept a lot of secrets while I'm under the influence. So, perhaps it's not that much of a problem. Another one is like, you've got some acutely ill humans, right? PTSD from whatever. Interesting to note that even veterans who didn't have combat are getting some pretty high rates of PTSD. Like even if they're just like being a mechanic on a base or something, or like a veterinarian on a base or whatever, like you can still get some serious PTSD for some reason. I don't totally understand that yet. Mm-hmm. So we don't even have to say it's exclusively for combat veterans who have killed people. But combat veterans and regular veterans, like non-combat veterans, are not necessarily in a position to have unpredictable behavior post-session, right? So like, I hope people understand that people can act weird after a psychedelic experience. It's not just you're going to act weird during it. You can act pretty weird after. And if you have to make life and death decisions, around heavy equipment or with guns or whatnot, something that could cause another war, like should you have been compromised by psychedelics? I think the answer is no. And it's, even if it's a 3% or 1% of people, like that's still too much in a military scenario. So this, I think, is why they want some non-psychedelic agents. If we look at Iboga, Ibogaine, like there's some pretty strong reasons why people might not want the psychedelic experience in those states. Like, I do think you're right that something about the psychedelic experience in the right set and setting is highly therapeutic and helpful in and of itself. But there's also some other mechanisms going on below the surface as well. So, yeah, I think people just have weak bodies sometimes, or like maybe, they're just not stable enough to introduce psychedelic drugs. Like somebody who's super unstable, and we've chatted about this a bunch, they probably need a lot more room after the experience for the experience to have been beneficial for them than somebody else who can just drive right back into New York City or something after the experience. And, there's a lot there. I think there's a lot of reasons to take the trip out of it and to make new medicines. Like if it's not necessary, why have it? Like it's kind of like shaving down to the essentials. Like if we can heal people and it isn't as expensive to heal them in a non-psychedelic sense, then should we? I think the answer is yes. Like it's a lot less expensive to treat somebody with a non-psychedelic compound than a psychedelic compound. It just ups the price a lot. Like what other drug do you really need to be supervised under? Yeah. Like the only analogy I can see is something like ECT, like electroconvulsive therapy or whatever. And like that certainly is a supervised scenario, and that's a treatment that needs to be supervised. It's almost like a surgery in a sense. So I don't know, there's a lot to think about there. And, most people have compassion for veterans. I used to be one of those people when I saw those support our troops things. Like I was very anti whatever war started in 2003 in Iraq. I forget what we even want to call that one. I was very upset about it. I was even in like anti-war type classes in my undergrad, like learning a lot about the peace movement. I was just like, I couldn't handle conversation about being sympathetic to soldiers at that point. Now my tune has changed quite a bit. Like I have a lot of veteran friends now, and I'm a lot more sympathetic to why they went in, the implications of joining, and, like how horrible the federal government is to veterans at times. So like, there's, a lot of shady stuff that's not even discussed in the popular dialogue. So, I'm highly sympathetic to those people now. A critique that we hear sometimes is, does this just make war cheaper?
Yeah.
Because you can't just decommission your soldier and slap in a new one cheaply. That's kind of an expense issue. So like mental health in war is for war type people, a problem to be solved.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird. It's like kind of treating people as kind of a raw material almost. And like, how do we get our soldiers as commodity cheaper?
Yeah.
It kind of sickening, kind of clever. I don't really know how to feel about it. But it's like, okay, if you can just heal that soldier that took $2 million to train, then we don't have to spend that $2 million again. We can spend $30,000 or $50,000 to fix that person, quote unquote fix, and slap them back into the war zone. It's super complicated. It's really not an easy topic. Like terrorism is real. Dirty bombs are real. A lot of people don't like America for a lot of reasons. So like in the West for a lot of reasons. So some of them good, some of them kind of lies, but we're in a complicated spot, and it's not just the capitalism and psychedelics is a complicated thing. It's the world is horrifically complicated.
Totally is. Yeah. It really is.
It's like, do we really need to invoke supernatural things to be terrified of? Like, aliens or this whole like adrenochrome conspiracy junk, which is something we never talked about on the show, right? Did we?
Yeah. No, we had a link up and we never touched on it. It was like a few weeks ago. I think it was supposed to be on like week 1. We were supposed to discuss that.
So adrenochrome is a real thing. It was touched in Hunter Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, both the book and the movie. In Mike J's Mescaline, he digs into the history of adrenochrome, and there's really just not much there. Like it shows like where Hunter Thompson kind of got the idea and how he inserted it in the novel. And it was just like this kind of kooky thread he wanted to insert to like kind of fuck with people, like insert that paranoia. And now it's spiraled out to like, like there's all these ridiculous conspiracy theories out there that have no basis and like anything that's provable. So it's like, what are you guys doing? I don't know. I got in a bunch of shit on Twitter about it. But yeah, I don't know. It's not something that you can really get. It's an oxidized form of adrenaline from what I understand. So from adrenaline, which people can buy, you could theoretically oxidize it and make it for yourself or something. But I don't really know what it does or why people like it. Or even if people are using it, honestly. Mike J's Mescaline, again, I really suggest people read that and dig in. And it's near the end of the book where he talks about that. Mescaline and pop culture and variants in the pharmacopoeia. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that whole adrenochrome deal or...
No, I know. When you sent me that link, I started looking into it, and I know it was like conspiracies around COVID, and then the elites like harvesting adrenaline from like young kid. I don't know. Yeah, it gets kind of wacky when I start reading stuff like that. I'm like, eh.
Yeah, how much can I really spend on this? Like, not much time, really. So.
Yeah, I was just going to comment back on like the war thing and, non-psychedelic compounds. And I mentioned this before, either on our podcast or somebody else's podcast. We're thinking about populations that might not be able to really take time off, or maybe it's something consistent where they find healing. So like cluster headaches, for example. They found a derivative of LSD, 2-bromo-LSD, that found benefit from cluster headaches without the hallucinogenic properties. And, somebody that's like going through something like that, would you really want to be tripping? Like, I don't know, what's your dosage, right? Like, how often are you
sometimes
doing
really
that?
high for cluster headache people.
Yeah, and it's like, how often do you want to be doing that? If it's a monthly thing to get relief. So I definitely see the benefit in psychedelic compounds for things like that. And, you're talking about maybe populations that might not be able to like take time off. Something that just popped in my head was I read an article about a doctor who committed suicide in Manhattan, I believe, just from being overworked with the whole COVID crisis and everything like that. Like, just thinking about people in these like, high stress jobs that can't take a whole weekend off to go on a psychedelic trip. And like, what if we had some sort of substance where they had like a night that was like maybe quick acting, maybe they could cope with some of the depression or whatever is going on. I mean, obviously that's environmental in the sense of like overwork, stress, you're dealing with people dying constantly. A lot of complexities there, but just thinking about people that like work these in these positions, would it be nice to possibly have a medication that could help you kind of like just get back in line until you could take that weekend off to have a psychedelic experience, and to really dig into some of that other stuff. So yeah, I don't know. This is, complex stuff at times. I think just looking at all the different sides, right? Like I definitely see the pros and cons to all these different angles at times. And when we start seeing this stuff pop up, how can we really just like take time to analyze all these different sides and try to come up with like a conclusion for ourselves that feels best, right? Like I think it's easy just to say, oh, like I definitely claim my bias of the psychedelic experience and working with, holotropic states. And sometimes I have to really pull back and be like, well, what about other people like that might not want to engage in that, and to say that they have to engage in that, is that fair? I don't know, right? Like, so, really just taking time to do a lot of self-reflection on a lot of this stuff, corporation stuff, business stuff, right? Like I see the pros and cons with it as well. It's like, all right, innovation, possibly getting this stuff to market, having it accessible. That's what we've all been rooting for. And then on the other side, we see like capitalistic greed, where then you see the dark side of it come out and you're like, it's not really how I would want to see it move forward. But understanding the world that we live in, and this is kind of like how things operate, unfortunately. And it's like, yeah, there's all these kind of like double-edged swords here. And how can we just take time to, I don't know, really reflect on it and think about all these different sides to the coin.
Right. It's never like side A versus side B. It's like there's like 20 sides to this discussion, and we're not necessarily always taking them seriously. We kind of need to. Like, how do we bring more angles in? Mm-hmm. Say like, okay, it's and is this shit being manufactured? Are these arguments being manufactured? Is a really interesting idea. Like
right.
The response to me from a lot of decrim nature people is not great. And I'm like, hey, do you guys really believe this? Like, are you really thinking I'm the enemy here, or I'm not on your side? It's like I'm on your side, plus I'm on the side of about 100 other things. Mm-hmm. Like I'm not against you guys getting your plants legal. I'm like, okay, we should need to get everything beyond like this drug war. Like the drug war is the enemy in a lot of ways, and yeah, and. If we could get rid of that, we could kind of figure out what normal looks like. If we all have the rights we want, which is going to be hard to get, but if we can get that, then we can build something really creative. But it's like, why is your view better than my view? I don't get it. I'm not necessarily there. Like this whole IP34 thing in Oregon, which if you're in Oregon, you might consider voting on IP34. I think it's in a couple months. It's about legal psilocybin therapy centers and a regulated framework for that. I'm getting a little bit of pushback for being pro it on our Facebook group because there's this clause in there that people think is sinister. If you want to learn more, just join our Facebook group. But it's like, I read it and I just don't necessarily agree that it's that sinister. It's like just the fact that towns can't double tax businesses. That's what I saw. Like a town can't make its own regulation because it's a state level regulation. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's weird shit, man. I would love to be able to have firm conclusions. Like I certainly think that yes, we should have legal access to psilocybin centers and like with food safety quality on the mushrooms. A lot of people say, don't let the government's hands on my mushrooms. It's like, well, they're not your mushrooms. You can still grow your own, I guess, but hopefully with a lesser penalty if you get caught, because there's now legal markets. Mm-hmm. It's like if you're not selling them and putting people in food safety risk the same way you're selling an unsafe grilled cheese to somebody, like, you know, like that could be the issue. But, you know, I don't know. Like if I was going to buy stuff from a store, from an individual, largely I would want to be sure that I wasn't going to get food poisoning. Mm-hmm. Or buy some bad LSD. I would love a lab verified stamp on it. So yes, LSD, cool. Like, you know, I don't see what the issues there.
Well, I guess something that comes up is like looking at cannabis, for example. So like, you know, you're in Colorado, you're able to get medical, you're able to go to a recreational store, and you're allowed to grow your own, right?
Right.
And so you have all these options. In New Jersey, I don't think that they're going to allow you to grow. And I know some states that have become recreational, like, you know, you can't grow anything. And so I think that is an odd thing where it's like you have to buy marijuana from us, from the state. And you are not allowed to grow. And if you do, that's still either a felony or I don't know what they're like looking at. But, you know, that feels really weird of like, hey, like how come I could go buy it in the store from you and you're controlling the market and I can't just grow that plant out like I would grow a tomato? Like, I don't know.
Because it doesn't really count as legal at that point, right?
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
It doesn't really fit that criteria. Yeah. It's like, it's just a highly regulated thing.
Yeah.
And even in Colorado, there's a pretty substantial limit on what you can grow. Well, first off, you need your landlord's permission. I found that out the hard way. But, you know, it's a really interesting thing. Like what...
You know, if you're going to call it legal, then you should be able to grow your own, I think. Why would I have to buy it from you?
Mm-hmm. Well, the state wants their cut.
Right.
In New Jersey.
No, definitely.
And, you know, New Jersey is not necessarily the most politically clean state, right? So like, what is perfect? And I don't know. I think there was North Dakota was making it like wildly unregulated. They're like, here you go, legal cannabis. Good luck. It's like near zero regulation. I don't know if it's exactly North Dakota, but it was one of those states. And, you know, that's an interesting thing. I like in Colorado that they test for fungus, you know, different molds and pesticides. I'm sure there's people kind of skirting that, but there's also you can find a company, and if you agree with their ethics, you can buy their weed. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of places there's no organic certification as far as I understand, but there's companies that are coming pretty close to that. Like this living organic soil thing where it's even like more green than like just a normal soil grow outside because they're not having to replace the soil every time. It's like they're just maintaining a really quality soil and they can just replant in it. So that's really interesting. It's a lot less wasteful than a lot of this stuff. And, you know,
well, it's interesting too. Like, you know, I've definitely seen some products that like either friends or something bought, or when I was out there, and you look on the back, and you know, it's like bat guano, and I'm like, what? Like, are these joke ingredients? But then thinking about like, some of these companies are listing what they're putting in the soil and you know the fertilizers that they're using on the plants, and I thought that was like really interesting to know what people have been putting on their plants and selling to the consumer.
Totally. Yeah. There's some big stuff there. And like that's going above and beyond. Like what tomato company tells you what their soil is growing. And, you know, at one hand, these are kind of like bougie considerations that, you know, people with privilege and are rich, quote unquote, can consider. Like they've got time in their life to, but you know, that's what a market allows for when there is regulation of some kind. Like, you probably don't want to be smoking Roundup laced weed. Like there's been a lot of really gnarly things associated with Roundup. Like, do you really want to go there with something you're smoking? And no, in my opinion. So like, how do we handle this? And, carefully and slowly, I think is the move. Like, how do we consider all the options and not just make some rash things? And, the financial angle is really a big deal. Like, we've seen some states like Ohio, I think, was about to allow like maybe only 20 rich people to get the licenses.
Yep.
So they shot it down. Like, the whole state decided, no, this is ridiculous. Like, no, we don't want only 20 of the richest people to have the grows. We want this to be somewhat equitable. So I think that was a good move. I've heard that in Los Angeles County, some of the ways of righting the wrongs of the drug war have been to give preferential licenses to those that have been harmed by the drug war, maybe. Right. So like inner city folks that, got in trouble for selling weed years ago, and now they have easier access than some people to get in.
I think New Jersey was looking at that too, because I know Governor Murphy has been pushing this whole social justice thing, throughout his campaign, and just saying like, minorities have higher arrests here in New Jersey, and, wanting to possibly give access to them to start up their own shops or businesses. But I could be wrong. I haven't followed it in a bit.
Right. It's interesting. I think that's a really good model. I recorded a webinar with Erica Darragh from Sunrise Movement. She's chair of the board at SSDP. She's a really interesting person. Check that out on YouTube, people, if you want to check that out. But it's like how climate justice could end the drug war. And we talked a lot about how equitable ways of including people with less power or influence or privilege into the world of psychedelics. And it would be something like including licenses at a lower cost or at no cost to people who were harmed by that, or, are of lower socioeconomic status than the normal people who would be entering, right? Like, so it's interesting, and it's something we've got to keep playing with. And I would encourage people to keep thinking about this. And the more ahead we are of the government, the more likely we are to be able to influence policy once it's implemented, right? Like, that's something we really need to keep in mind.
I guess like moving forward, thinking about psychedelic industry, cannabis industry, whatnot, MAPS released a article on their spring bulletin called "A North Star for the Emerging Psychedelics Industry." So this is North Star, I believe, is an organization that just launched. But they're really trying to, I guess, provide some guidelines for people coming into this space, or just try to create guidelines for this new field. But one question on this article, and I think this is interesting and what I come back to at times, they ask, what if we could collectively embody the insights and values the medicines provide us and build them into the entities that will deliver these medicines? And, that's something I definitely think about, like going into these holotropic states and getting insights about sustainability and, oh, wow, like not taking advantage of people, and, just more of these like human values of how we treat people ethically and with integrity, and how can we embody that moving forward. And maybe that is some of the critique about these new players coming in. Like, are they really embodying some of these insights and values from the medicine experience, right? And I don't know, I think that's a valid concern that to have, right? It's like, these things are teaching us things. Are we integrating that? And are we actually embodying that into a belief system?
When we were hanging out with Britta Love at Horizons, she mentioned some phrase that I thought was powerful. It's like, the revolution will be embodied. And it kind of starts with us, and from us, the organizations we build. So yeah, like if we're not coming from psychedelic values and start our organization with psychedelic values, like what are we really building? And is it something that we really want to build? And then we have to what are psychedelic values? Like, psychedelic users can still be Nazis,
right?
Which isn't great. And are there psychedelic values? I guess like expanding the scope of what you value maybe like valuing the planet, valuing your place in the planet, wanting others to have what you have in a lot of ways. I don't know. What are some values you think are typically considered to be psychedelic values?
Yeah, great question. And I think, we had an interesting conversation about permaculture values, which probably there's a lot of similarities there. But like when I think about it, it's like, how do we honor lineage and kind of help to give back to the people that came before us that like really taught us where these medicines came from. So I'm thinking about a lot of the indigenous peoples that have been using these medicines for a while, and just even thinking about, the scientists and researchers more from the Western lineage with LSD and MDMA, and how do we honor those lineages? The sense of connection, and I guess like, why do you want to, like, would you screw your neighbor over or yourself over? Why would you want to screw everybody else over? This idea of like being interconnected. And I think we're starting to see that now, especially with like COVID, of seeing like how interconnected all of our systems are, and how do we operate knowing that, and like trying to move to a little bit more of a sustainable model, I guess, and just this idea of, I like this coming out of Fantastic Fungi. Nature really operates with cooperation versus like competition.
Survival of the most compatible is like my phrase for that. I love it.
Yeah. So just thinking about cooperation versus competition, and how can we cross-pollinate? How can we work together for this? I don't know. I think there's a lot of different things. The planet, like how do we like think about the planet? Climate change, like how do we protect our ecosystems without maybe overdoing it, over-consuming? I don't know. There's a lot. Anything that stands out for you, like when you think about that?
The ecological angle?
Just like, say, psychedelic values, I guess.
The idea, so I would almost want to say there are none, but I also want to say that there seems to be some that pop up fairly regularly. Like, our place in the cosmos is quite small. So that's kind of one. So like understanding our relationship to the cosmos and creation, and pondering that, I think, is a value. And then, this idea of interconnectedness, like you said, I think is really, really core. Like we are not alone. And, understanding our position on this planet, we're on a spaceship flying through the cosmos. We could crash into something tomorrow that wipes us all out. We don't know. Yeah. And this line from McKenna that I always kind of bring up is like the real lesson from psychedelics is to become increasingly comfortable with the uncertainty. And I think there's something really big there. Like a lot of people might want to say, no, it's this, the time ship from the dodecahedron that, the Resonance Project and all these people are talking about, that's what psychedelics is about. And I'm like, I don't know. I've looked into it quite deeply, and I haven't found anything really that compelling there. And other people find like, substantial validation in those belief systems that have been developed there. And, I don't know. Dreaming big, I think, is one. Like I always talk about Tim Leary a lot because he's been a big influence on me. But this idea of SMILE, it's an acronym: space migration, intelligence squared, and life extension. Like I think if we can figure out, he always thought of the Earth as kind of like an egg, like a human egg, and that like spaceships are kind of like spermatozoa trying to like fly out into space to see if there's something that they can make happen. And like we're kind of in this developmental phase of like, okay, we've got to figure out how to live on this planet, but we've also, we realize that catastrophe could happen at any moment with like the stuff under Yellowstone, nuclear war, whatever. So perhaps we need to make humanity a bit redundant. A lot of people kind of think that going to Mars is just for rich people. And I'm like, I don't think fucking rich people want to go to Mars. Like Mars kind of sucks. Mars won't be cool for another 700 years probably. Right. Unless you've got your deluxe underground bunker that'll last a long time. But even that, you're not going outside and being in nature, and humans are a product of nature and symbiotic with it at times. And it really helps us to be in the woods, and there's no woods there. Yeah. So like, it's not a great situation to be in Mars. So I don't know. I don't fantasize about how great it would be for rich people to be there. I think it's like, for humanity to be redundant. How do we do long-term planning? Maybe that's what I'm getting at. Like maybe a value is like, oh, what can we do tomorrow? But it's like, no, what does 300 years from now look like? And how can we make it as beautiful as possible? But, there's a lot there. Like I saw that on the MAPS article about North Star, they had a number of values or ethics outlined.
Yep.
Maybe we can I'll run through those real quick.
Cool.
I don't want to read them all out. I'll just read the headline. So starting with principle 1, as within, so without. Interesting. Principle 2, the process is the outcome. Yeah, I like that. Like process thinking. We're pretty aligned with that. Principle 3, move at the speed of trust. I kind of dig that too. Like, are you really going to partner with somebody for a long time if you don't trust them yet? Like we've been burned in the past. Like perhaps it makes a lot more sense to build trust and vet people and hang out with them a few times first. Yeah. Principle 4, inclusive interdependence and decentralization. Inclusive interdependence and decentralization. I like that. There's something there. Lean into tension as an opportunity for growth and learning. Yep. Honor and share collective wisdom for the benefit of all. Reciprocity, reparation, reclamation. Absolutely. Continuous iterative learning and evolution. Amen. I am part of something greater than myself. Yeah, for sure. And it seems like that's it for 9 principles.
I think that's pretty solid.
It seems to rhyme with the permaculture principles a little bit.
What are those? You said there's 12 principles, or
they're pretty interesting. I really appreciate them. And so permaculture is not just agriculture. Permaculture is a thing that you can use to design anything from your relationship to your daily schedule, to a business, to a nonprofit and whatever else. Like just understanding how your community might interact in a system. It's just a great tool for systems thinking and systems design. So it starts with observe and interact, catch and store energy, obtain a yield, apply self-regulation and feedback, use and value renewables. That's not really the initial phrasing of it. This website's taking some liberties. Produce no waste. That's definitely one. Design from pattern to detail. Integrate, don't segregate. Use small, slow solutions. Use and value diversity. Amen. Use edges and value the marginal. Like edges are the places where the most interesting things are happening in systems. And 12, creatively use and respond to change. So, I wouldn't be surprised if the North Star people looked at this or at least took a permaculture design course in the past. There's just some really valuable stuff there that could apply to the psychedelic world quite well. Yeah. It's this like really weird dichotomy right now between, business as usual capitalism and, small upstarts trying to provide this stuff. And they might be doctors. They might just be independent people without medical training. How do we really take that? I don't know. It's interesting. But yeah, I would encourage people to just really think carefully about how they want their vision to mature and perhaps where they want their place to be in the world. And something that's been coming up for me a lot lately is, did we take a moment to think about where we want to be in 5-10 years as individuals? A lot of people don't. They just hustle, and not necessarily think consciously about what they want their day-to-day to look like, what they want their relationships to look like, or, their businesses even. Do you want your business to just be steamrolling you every day? Your work to be fucking soul-crushing? No, you want it to be really amazing. And you want to feel alive all the time, not dead all the time like a lot of people do in corporate meetings. So happy to be out of corporate America.
Yeah, I think that hustle is just built in to like our culture. And what would it be like to take a step back and think about your life? And I always come back to that idea of like how we prepare for death is how we live our life, and do some self-reflection on that, right? Like, what does it look like if you just continue on the path that you're continuing on and imagining yourself on a deathbed and being like, do I really want to do that? And I mean, like, I always think about like reincarnation, right? Like, and I guess this kind of comes back to, this indigenous belief of looking at 7 years or 7 generations in the future, right? Like, how do you live your life to really provide for the next 7 generations? And I always think about that idea of like reincarnation, whether I actually believe in reincarnation or not. it's just an interesting thought experiment of if you were to come back here, say in 7 generations, what type of world would you want to leave behind for yourself? And I know, like, I do not want to leave behind a wasteland. So, like, how could you live a life thinking about those next 7 generations? Who knows? You might come back. We don't know. We have no idea what's on the other side of life. And maybe we do come back, maybe not. But also just thinking about those, those people that will be here in 7 generations and what type of world are we going to leave them? And so, I think about that pretty often. Do we just continue to extract and leave nothing behind? Or do we think about something a little bit more sustainable and being like, we have to keep the species alive, and why do we need everything now? And start taking more of a long-term approach. And I also like that idea of, who knows, maybe we get to the point where we have to get off spaceship Earth and find other resources. Maybe we do get there because we do extract things too much. But some things to think about.
Yeah, like as we die, like the thing we know is as we die, things will be on our conscience, and largely, unless you're just killed instantly, but things will be on your conscience. And having a clear conscience is pretty good. It's a nice thing to have as you're dying. Like you don't have to worry about like, oh, I think humanity only has 3 years left on the planet. Like you're like, oh, I did my best, and I hope they are able to handle it from here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some value in thinking that. So we're almost at an hour 10. So I'd say we should wrap up.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. So yeah, thank y'all for listening. If you want to support us, patreon.com/psychedelics today. You can leave a donation as small as $2 a month. We also love it when you share episodes with your friends. That helps us a ton. Another free way to help us is to leave a review on the Apple Podcast app on your phone or at Facebook or wherever. We just love to hear reviews from you. We've also got this Psychedelics in the Shadow course available at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. Been one of the biggest successes we've had in a long time. So check that out. It's a beautiful course. Kyle and Dr. Ito Cohen put that one together. Donation based. You can get in pretty cheap. And yeah, any support there, we really appreciate it. And hoping to do more of those in the future. We've also got a class coming up in July, August, 8-week live supported Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. It's just got a lot of great content in there. And we think it's a great foundation for your upcoming psychedelic career. A lot of people are panicking right now saying, oh no, like this psychedelic thing is coming and I am totally unprepared as a therapist. How do I get prepared? Education. And we've created a great package for you. So come check that out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. We've got a 2 p.m. and a 7 p.m. Eastern group that you can jump into. And Audible, audibletrial.com/psychedelics today, and scoop up some psychedelic books, get educated. Reading is a great way to get educated, and Audible makes it a lot easier. It's absolutely the most used app on my phone. I think I checked out 3 different books today, from Carl Jung's Man in Search of His Soul to an autobiography on the rapper Rick Ross. So, nice. Who I know nothing about. So it's really interesting. I don't even know his music. So it's really interesting to read somebody's autobiography like that. And there's plenty. Tim Leary, Terrence McKenna, Bill Richards, even Chris Bache's LSD in the Mind of the Universe is up there now. So
nice.
Check it all out.
That was released.
I'll be scooping that up pretty soon. I feel like I should reread Holotropic Breathwork first before I do that, but we'll see. Coin toss. Anything else, Kyle?
No, it's good on my end. I hope everybody is staying safe, staying healthy, and have a great weekend if you're listening to this on a Friday. We'll catch you on Tuesday.
You all. Yeah. We'll catch you next Tuesday, everybody. Joe Moore, Carl Buller, signing off for Psychedelics Today. Take care.